I'm Jennifer Hurvitz, and welcome to Doing Relationships Right. Raw, authentic, and insightful, this podcast is a no bullshit look at relationships during midlife. It's not just talk, it's practical advice you can use, stressing self-improvement and personal growth. This podcast guides you in navigating online dating, building resilience, and finding the right partner for a fulfilling and healthy relationship. Have questions that need answering? No worries, I've got you. And we'll figure it all out together without taking ourselves too seriously here on Doing Relationships Right. Good morning. Good morning. This is Doing Relationships Right. I'm Jennifer Hurvitz, back with you today with an amazing guest, of course, because I always bring you the best guests. That's all I have to say about it. But I'm going to do a little introduction of Thais Gibson. Hi, Thais. How are you, honey?
Hi, I'm so grateful to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
I love that you're here. Just chill for 1 minute so I can talk about you for a little bit, okay? Thais Gibson is a counselor, best-selling author, and co-founder of the Personal Development School. She has a PhD. Girl, you do? You're so smart. Okay, PhD and over 13 certifications in modalities ranging from CBT, which I love, NLP, amazing, somatic, listen to me, I'm like going on about your thing. I'm like, this is somatic experiencing and internal family systems to shadow work and hypnosis. Shadow work. We have to talk about shadow work. Can we?
Absolutely. It's such a fun topic.
I'm so glad you're here. Hi, honey. How are you?
I'm so good. I'm so grateful to be here.
Oh my gosh, I have no idea. So tell me. Let's start by saying a little bit about you. What do you do? How did you get to where you are? You're so young yet so established. I'm very impressed with you. I have to tell you, very impressed.
I got to this whole field and this whole study of all these things because probably like so many people, I just had so many questions about relationships growing up. So I went through a lot of chaos around me in terms of relationships in childhood. I saw lots of big ups and downs. And I think from a very young age, I wondered how are my parents who, love each other, how are they always in this chaos together? How are they always in these big arguments? And they went through a 17+ year divorce and never really finished the divorce. They still go back to court every so often, all this time later. And so I just grew up being like, why do things have to be like this? And so I was a very sensitive child. I internalized a lot of that. I was definitely in the middle of a lot of it as well. I think that both of my parents didn't really speak to people outside of the household about what they were going through, more maybe because they wanted to, keep up a certain, way of looking. And so they would come to me with their stuff. So they would kind of come back and forth when I was very young, and I would hear about all the things from either side. And so that was maybe a difficult thing in the sense of it was being parentified as a child, which I think a lot of people can probably relate to. But honestly, the silver lining is that I got so interested in human beings and behavior and why people do what they do and their experiences. And I've just always been obsessed with people. I just love people. I think they're so interesting. I can't help myself. And when I hit my teenage years, I really struggled for a long time as a teenager because I think I just came to this tipping point where I had taken in so much and didn't know how to sift through it. And I just became rebellious and chaotic and all the things. And I was actually a fearful avoidant attachment style. So, had a lot of chaos there, and then got sick and tired of living like that after a long time, had really not healthy coping mechanisms, had all these things working against me.
I'm with you.
And eventually I was, 20 years old going, I can't live like this. Whatever's happening for me, I am sabotaging my life. I need to go figure things out. And I realized I was the common denominator in so many of these situations.
Oh my gosh. Wait, I have questions first. Really, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second because at 20 years old, you had already, the fact that you were holding yourself accountable, you knew that you wanted to live like that. That's very grown up and mature because I have a 20-year-old and a 22-year-old, and I'm not so sure they're there yet.
I probably was more chaotic than your 20 and 22-year-old, I would imagine.
I don't know. They're pretty crazy.
I was sabotaging my life in pretty extreme ways. So I was like, okay, I cannot go on in this way. It was definitely a critical sort of point. And I think I grew up fast. I left my home at 17 and never went back. So I think I was kind of, I was moving into a space of having to be accountable for my own bills and my own things at that age. And it was good for me. I mean, honestly, to hit a rock bottom and to go through a point in time where I was like, I'm like not going to be able to pay my bills or pay for school or, all these things. And to also look at how much I was suffering and just realizing like I'm sabotaging all my relationships. Everything's a mess. And to have to look within, oh my gosh, I'm grateful for that, because that like really grew me in beautiful ways. And I was actually in a psychology class soon after that. And I was somebody who spent a lot of time going, I'm going to change this. I'm going to do this differently. And I would journal about it and I would tell myself, and then I would go back through these same patterns. And I actually had somebody say to me in a psych class, they said, your conscious mind can't outwill your subconscious mind. And I was like, oh my goodness. So you mean all the times that I tell myself I'm going to break a bad habit or change something and maybe stop getting so angry in relationships or raising my voice or being harsh with my words or pushing people away, all these things, all the times I say I'm going to do them and I don't follow through, it's not because I'm weak or incapable or not good enough. It's just because my subconscious mind is working against me. So I then became obsessed with learning about my subconscious mind and what my own personal conditioning was and programming and the patterns I had uptake, through there and how I can start to change them. And so that's where I really went into like hypnosis and NLP and a lot of these different things, and really profoundly changed my life, like 180, and was like, why is nobody talking about this? And that was where I sort of got into this whole field, was just starting to put this information anywhere that I could.
Amazing. So you created this school, this coaching program, everything, the personal development school. Okay. So talk about that. It looks amazing.
Thank you.
I mean, you have so many, everyone has to, first of all, everyone follow Thais because you have just this way about you. Your vibe is very chill. I feel like you're smart, and I feel like you really know what you're talking about. And a lot of people don't. I feel like they just don't. They're just like, repeating what they've seen on the internet. And I am just completely, I think you're amazing. So talk about this.
Sweet. You are also amazing.
And thank you, honey.
Incredible.
Thank you. But tell me the personal development school, because I'm thinking maybe I want to get coaching from you.
So the personal development school actually came about because I was seeing clients. So I started at like 22 and a half and I was still in school. I wasn't finished with anything. And I started being like, I had changed so profoundly in just a couple of years. I have a very intense personality with like, I throw myself into things head first. So when I got obsessed with learning about the subconscious mind as part of my healing, I like ate, lived, breathed that for 2 years, saw these profound changes, and then started just giving workshops for free to people. I would host meetup groups and rent library space and just give these personal development sort of like workshops about the subconscious mind. And within like a year, I had like a 2-year wait list for clients. So I had a full practice and I had this long wait list, and I was seeing people. And then I started doing group workshops for people I couldn't see in one-to-ones, and doing these sort of 8-week programs and things like that. And these kind of like almost courses. And this is back, quite a while ago now, before anything was moved online. So it was all in person, and I was renting space, and I was almost like an event coordinator / all these things. And I saw clients for the better part of 10 years before realizing like I was really trading a lot of my time for money. And I was kind of teetering on the edge of burnout for how much I was saying yes to things, because I was so excited and passionate, but you only have so much energy you can give. And so I actually moved it into packaging these workshops, and then went on to launch a school and put all this sort of information. And the personal development school is all personal development, whether it's for boundaries, changing your relationship style, like your attachment style, communication, you name it, like set and achieve goals with your subconscious mind. But it's all designed to be for your subconscious. So rather than just getting the information and here's what's happening, it's all about here's how to actually recondition the patterns that are not working for you by leveraging my background in hypnosis and neurolinguistic programming. So it's like, hey, here's how to actually repattern these things so you get that change, you get those lasting results. And so that's where all the sort of programs come from in PDS.
Okay, so I've so many things to like ask you, but first I have to tell you my son goes to Syracuse, and this is his major. This is what he wants to do.
Oh,
so
cool.
I'm listening to, and I'm going, oh, maybe Thais, can you talk to my kid? Because he is so much like you're like, when you're talking, I'm like, you're describing my son. Like he's totally like into all this stuff that you are doing. And I think
so
that,
exciting.
yeah, and
I
you're
would
young.
love to.
He'll probably think you're cool. So he doesn't want me to help him. He wants someone else help. So we talked about, or you're talking about a lot about shadow work.
Yes.
Okay. Please explain. Do you mind that I'm making you talk so much?
Of course. I love all
Oh
this
my
stuff.
gosh. Okay. Talk about shadow work. Like what's different? And then I want to do attachment styles too. I'm sure they go together. Yes.
Perfect. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. So shadow work is originally coined by Carl Jung, and the shadow is described as the part of it comes from like Jungian psychology, and it's described as the part of ourselves that we try to deny or hide. And so basically, if you imagine somebody grows up in a household where let's say they grow up with a family, and maybe there's a big family and there's lots of children. And so maybe a child in that kind of environment learns that being loud helps me get attention in this big family and helps me stand out. So they get conditioned at a subconscious level to build in positive emotional associations with being loud. They think being loud is a good trait. It gets their needs met. So they're like, this is good. And that becomes a part of their personality. But then let's say we grow up with somebody in a totally different cultural background where being loud, and maybe it's a small family with more avoidant parents, and being loud in this family system is going to get you a situation where you get rejected, shamed, criticized for being loud. Be quiet. Ladies aren't loud.
Much.
Ladies don't raise their voice.
Right.
Exactly. Too much, that kind of conditioning. So we can have a different dynamic where we think, oh, this is going to not get my needs met, and I have to repress this part of myself. And so what we do is we try to push down the expression of the trait into our own subconscious in a sense. So we repress it. And it's not part of our conscious mind's awareness that, guess what? Because we're a human being, we actually have the access to all of these traits at different times. So our shadow, what happens with our shadow and how this sort of comes full circle, which is super interesting, is that we now have different conditions imposed on these specific traits where we think they're good or bad. So we express them or repress them. But we're always going to be expressing traits in hidden forms, even if we're not expressing it in the form that we originally learned was quote unquote negative. So when we look at this, and I'll go through to make it make very clear sense because it's kind of a confusing topic at first. The idea is that traits are not positive or negative. Our conditioning around them is positive or negative. And when we think that we're repressing a trait, it's usually just rearing its head in a hidden form. It's almost like a beach ball. If you try to push it under the water, you try to push it down, but the moment you let go, it's going to pop up in another form. It's with ferocity. So what happens is we think that we are not these traits, but because we've learned that they are negative things, the ones that we're repressing, we get very triggered by them in other people. Now, there's this old Rumi quote, and I love this. It reminds me of the sort of shadow work dynamic. And he says, if I'm irritated by every rub, how will I ever be polished? And the idea is that everything that is triggering us is actually showing us to ourselves. And this is where shadow work really comes into play. So I often give an exercise to people, and this really will help the idea of the shadow come full circle. I ask them, okay, what triggers you about somebody in your life? And, let's say we pick one person who triggers you, or a type of person that triggers you, the person who always takes more than they give, or the person who, violates your boundaries, or is not empathetic, or is dismissing you. These types of things that really get under people's skin.
That is a trigger for me, dismissive behavior.
Okay, so let's do that one together.
Let's do that one, please. Yes, I'm excited.
And here we'll actually see this. So we'll do this together. So there's a 3-step exercise. So what we first look for is often, as I mentioned earlier, the things that we think are negative and that we've repressed, we never actually are able to fully repress. They're just showing up in our lives in hidden forms. And that's why they're called our shadow. So now we look and we say, okay, let's look at different places these hidden forms could exist. So I would ask you, is there anywhere that you actually dismiss yourself? Dismiss your own feelings or needs because you're prioritizing other people. And what comes to mind for you? What are some examples if you feel comfortable sharing?
Of course. This is why you're here. I feel like I'm a people pleaser.
Yes.
So I'm constantly, everyone else is more important than me, always.
Oh my goodness.
Constantly. Yeah. So
that's a really big way to dismiss yourself.
Yeah.
And so what happens is in that case, because that's actually very personal to us, we take it so personally when other people around us express it. And that's where it's our shadow. It's something that triggers us because it's still us, but it's lingering in the background, which is, why it's the shadow. Right. And another place we can look, and this requires radical honesty. This is like the hard exercise, but it's the deep work. I love this work. I've done this work so much on myself. But the next place would be, do you ever have a reactive form of dismissing somebody? So when somebody's dismissing you, the person you're triggered by, do you ever reactively dismiss them back?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, there's here's the truth, Hurvitz, right here. Yeah, no. Yeah, I'm the worst. And you know what? I do. I feel like I'm immediately triggered and then I react and then I'm like, absolutely.
Totally. When I first did this one on myself, I actually was triggered by dismissiveness a lot too. And I was like, oh, I definitely dismiss my own feelings and needs and even boundaries in favor of like looking out for other people first. And then I looked and I was like, oh my goodness, I was doing this on a coworker who triggered me. This is like 12 years ago. And it was somebody I worked with at the time. And when he would be dismissive, I would be like, oh, you're not going to be conversational? Fine. I'm not going to talk to you either.
Right. You're like, done.
Exactly. So it's like, it's funny because we justify in our minds, right? Like, oh, okay, because they did it, I'm going to do it back. But we're just being what we're judging in the first place, right? That's the irony.
I love that. Yes, I love it. Everyone needs to rewind, please, and hear that again. Listen, please, closely, because it's 100% true.
Yeah.
You give out what you get what you give. No, vice versa.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No. You're doing what you're judging, really. And there's this, it reminds me of another quote I read in a book once. I can't remember who said it, but it said, he who hates evil only creates more of it. And it's sort of the same idea, right? Like we're like so angry at the thing that we become the thing and we don't realize, oh, we're just doing more of exactly what we were triggered by in the first place. And it's hilarious, but it's often out of our conscious mind's awareness. So that's where it's in our subconscious, it's our shadow. So, and then the third part, which is so interesting, and I'll share first, if that's helpful too.
Of course.
I did this work on dismissiveness as well once, and I looked for, where am I dismissing somebody else in my life and not realizing? So we look for, where do I have a shadow of the same trait somewhere else in my life and I'm not recognizing it? And it gives us an opportunity to have like a 360-degree view into our own patterns of behavior. And what I found at the time that I was doing this, I was working on improving the relationship with my father. And I was really mad at my father for a few years. And I shut down and I iced him out. And I was intentionally really trying to repair the relationship at this point in time. And I realized, oh my goodness, I just miss my father when he reaches out sometimes still. And here I am, triggered by this coworker, and I'm actually making somebody in my life who I'm intending to have a better relationship with feel the exact same way that this stranger almost is making me feel. And it was so eye-opening to me. And again, that's like another sort of representation of the shadow, because it's that we are that thing just in this shadowy or hidden form from which we're judging. And I'm curious if you have one that comes up for you where you're dismissing somebody in your life and you weren't realizing.
Yes. I mean, no, I think the problem with me is I think I am realizing it. And then I feel such guilt afterwards because I'm like, I know exactly what I just did. So my question is like, even going a little bit further with you, how do you stop yourself? How do you catch yourself in the moment? Let's say like me, I do. Like my boyfriend and I have been together 8 years, and I'm so dismissive sometimes, to the point where I'm like, how could I just? What am I doing? Right?
Beautiful, yeah.
And I hate being dismissed. It's my trigger, like the worst trigger.
Absolutely.
So it's just so interesting that I see it in myself, and then I can admit it, but I'm like, okay, what now?
Beautiful. So that brings us to part 2. So that first that first like 3 questions of like, where, the first part is like, hey, what is the trait that I'm judging in somebody else or that really triggers me about another person? And then A, where do I do this to myself? B, where do I do this reactively to the person? And C, do I do this to anyone else in my life and don't realize it? And that's sort of that like awareness part of the exercise. And then it moves us into the next part, which is, well, what is the root cause of why this happens in the first place? So if you look at the person, for example, so in your case, like your boyfriend, where you dismiss him, what do you think the root cause is in those moments that you tend to dismiss? What are you feeling, or what comes up for you in those moments?
I probably, you know what? It's so interesting. I probably feel either insecure about something that I'm talking about, or maybe I don't really know the answer, but I'm sick of him telling me. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm like, it's enough, and I'm dismissive. Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely is coming from me not being good enough, I think.
Beautiful. Okay. So then the next question becomes, how do you actually heal that core wound? And a big part of the work that we do is actually core wound reconditioning, because, and that brings us into sort of a deeper conversation, but I would love to maybe share a tool with you around that if you're open.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So this is like one of my favorite tools ever. And I talk about this probably far too often on the internet, but it's called autosuggestion. And it actually comes from a background in hypnosis and understanding neuroplasticity. But it's this idea that we have these core wounds, these ideas about ourselves, like not good enough, I'll be abandoned, alone, I'll be trapped, I'll be helpless, these big core fears that we adopt from earlier experiences in our childhood or upbringing. And then we store as a part of our sense of self-identity. And they are subconscious, I think, is one of the first things we have to acknowledge, because our conscious mind is not choosing to believe these things. We're not waking up going, today I'm going to tell myself I'm not good enough all day and see what happens, right? Those are not, so they're not conscious choices. They're pre-existing subconscious belief systems. And so then the question becomes, well, if we've been carrying this belief system about ourselves that sometimes gets catalyzed or brought to the surface in situations where my partner is explaining something to me and I don't want him to explain it to me, or it's triggering insecurities, these things where they're inconvenient times throughout our lives, then, how do I change this if I'm believing this about myself? And the answer lies in understanding neuroplasticity. The answer is in realizing that your conscious mind isn't going to be able to change this, because our conscious mind can't outwill our subconscious mind, but it can recondition it. And so when we realize that this wound exists at the subconscious level, we also can recognize, hey, guess what? We weren't born with this wound. This got conditioned into us over time. And how we actually adopt conditioned patterns is through repetition and emotion. It's repetition and emotion that fire and wire neural pathways until they become solidified enough that they become a part of our sense of self. And so there may have been a time, and I'm curious if this shows up for you, where maybe in your own upbringing or past experiences, there was a lot of repetitive times that somebody made you feel not good enough. Absolutely. Or was maybe harsh or critical.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
And so we see, okay, now I've got this idea about myself that I didn't ask for, that I probably didn't even want.
Yeah, I didn't
and now
want it.
It's showing up, and it's actually causing me to have these dismissive or reactive dismissive patterns back to somebody else. So, okay, I need to change that core wound. So there's 3 steps to doing this. Okay. First step is find its opposite, which is a really easy step. So I am good enough.
Yeah,
right?
I am. Definitely.
And second step is we cannot just do something like use affirmations, because affirmations are language. I am good enough. I am good enough. It's just language. Your subconscious mind does not speak language at all. It speaks in emotions and images. And a really obvious example of this is if I were to say to you, okay, whatever you do not think of a chocolate chip cookie.
Oh, I immediately thought of chocolate chip cookie.
And it's because your conscious mind hears do not, it hears the language, but your subconscious mind, it takes in only imagery and emotion.
Yes.
So
it's so cool.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So when we use affirmations, it's our conscious mind speaking to our conscious mind, but we know that the not good enough wound is subconscious, because we're not waking up saying, I'm going to choose to tell myself I'm not good enough. So we have to speak to the subconscious mind. So how do we get emotion and imagery? And the answer to this, which is so interesting, is that all memories are actually containers for emotions and images. So if I were to say to you, okay, tell me your favorite childhood memory, and let's say you're playing by the beach with your parents and your siblings, you would see in those images, or in those memories, the images of their face maybe, or the images of the water and the sand. And we've all seen people when they tell an old story or they recount an old memory, they laugh or they smile so all memories are just containers really for images and emotions. So now we know, okay, I can use memory to speak to my subconscious. So step 1, what's the core wound and its opposite? I am not good enough. I am good enough. Step 2, we need 10 memories of times we actually felt good enough. And they can be teeny tiny. They can be really small. They can be like, I was a really good friend yesterday, or I had a hard conversation with one of my kids 3 days ago and I showed up well as a mother. It can be, they don't have to be like monumental achievements. They can be these daily things that are like part of our lives that we just have to give attention to. And what we do in step 2 is we find 10 because we need repetition and emotion and imagery to fire and wire new neural pathways. So that's step 2. We need 10 memories. We write them down. Step 3, we record them by saying them out loud into our phones, for example. And then we listen back to them for 21 days, because research shows it takes 21 days to properly create new neural networks that are going to be strong enough to stick. So what we have now done is we've gone, okay, I have this shadow over here. I have this triggering pattern. And then let me actually go under and get to the even root of that. Okay, I have this pattern myself, or I, get triggered in this particular case. Why? Okay, there's this core wound, this idea that I'm not good enough. Let me recondition that using this auto suggestion 3-step tool. Listen back to how I am good enough for 21 days, see the imagery, feel the emotions as I'm listening back to those 10 pieces of evidence or memory. And now all of a sudden, I'm teaching my subconscious mind. I'm using my conscious mind to speak to my subconscious to see that I am good enough. And then next time, if somebody's over explaining something to me, or my partner's putting me in a tough spot, I'm not going to have that trigger come up. I may say, hey, I'd love to talk about, something else. Or, hey, sometimes when I may communicate a need or a boundary and maybe how the delivery is or something, but I'm not going to personalize it and then dismiss it in the same way that I would do in that particular case.
Okay, that's amazing, because I can totally, like, while you're talking, I'm like 100% do all of that.
Amazing.
It's like actionable value. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It like brings, it's like real steps to, like, it's not just someone saying, oh, no, talk. I feel like sometimes people go to therapy or they go to whatever, and it's a lot of talking when not a lot of action.
100%.
And this seems like just so actionable. I love it.
Thank you. And that was like my personal kind of like, I don't want to say bone to pick, because there's a lot of amazing things about the Western system of healthcare. But sometimes if you look at the traditional talk therapy or even like analytical psychology, sometimes a lot of it is like we tell old stories about our traumas, but that's actually reinforcing old neural networks that tell us we're not good enough, or we're unworthy, or we're bad, or we're shameful, or, whatever those things are. So we actually have to go in there and find out what the core wounds are associated with the trauma and recondition those ideas about ourselves. And that's where we see the needle move and we see actual progress and healing.
Because, what's interesting to me is that a lot of people in my life, they go to therapy and then they find out that something's from a childhood trauma, or they have a lot of, and then they start blaming the parent or blaming whoever. And they're in this negative space of, well, now I know why I am the way I am because my mom did X, Y, or Z. And then it just goes one step further where then you're angry and so this is just makes more sense to me that you would work on yourself and figuring out without blaming.
Exactly. And if you look at the research around post-traumatic growth, it's really interesting. The research around post-traumatic growth, like how we grow after trauma, is that we know one of the biggest impactors, there's a few like main principles, but one of the biggest impactors is that we didn't keep the story of ourselves that we developed because of the trauma. So if we look at like a more extreme case and kind of like a trigger warning for people, but I worked with people who, let's say this is like a pretty big trigger warning, but let's say somebody was sexually abused in childhood. Well, what happens is that the true trauma is not just that it happened, but that usually one of the common outputs around that is you'll see that person then developed this idea about themselves that I'm bad, I'm shameful, there's something wrong with me, I'm unsafe, I can't trust people. And now they've carried this idea everywhere, and it goes with them into their future relationships and how they choose to trust. It goes into their self-worth. And so the real trauma is that you're repeating that idea about yourself on an ongoing basis because it's been a part of your subconscious self-identity after that traumatic event. And so what we really do if we want progress and healing is we don't even have to go back and relive the trauma. We just realize, hey, I've been carrying these really painful ideas about myself. These are my big triggers. Let's use auto-suggestion, for example, to change these ideas, to fire and wire new neural networks where we believe different things about ourselves. We see the needle move. And now, what happens, which is so friggin' powerful and interesting, is that people go and then they eventually recount old memories if they need to. And they say, and when they recount these old traumatic memories, they'll report things like, oh, I feel kind of distant from that now. My heart doesn't start racing when I think of it, or I don't feel like I get the ball in my throat and I'm about to cry, or I'm not panicking when I'm about to think of this old memory. I can think of it and it doesn't feel so personal to me. And it's because we're not still carrying these concepts and ideas about ourselves that are alive and well because we haven't reconditioned them. And that's the trauma that we're carrying with us on a daily basis that goes everywhere. And that's the work that we really have to do.
I mean, it's unbelievable. It really does make so much sense. And I love the fact that you don't have to keep going back to the same, the thing that triggered you or the trauma part of it. Because for me, I had something horrible, whatever. I don't want to go back. I don't want to remember it all the time. I'm like, please God, don't make me relive that again.
Exactly.
So it would make so much more sense if you could put it away and work on it and then not have to go back there.
change
You
the
know,
beliefs you acquired because of it, which is going
yes,
to make you feel like you are not that anymore, or locked in there, or chained to it in some particular way, because you don't still
absolutely.
have those stories connected to it about yourself. You're free of those stories about yourself, and now it's actually in the past where it belongs.
Oh my gosh, I love it. And I think also that you do a lot of work too with attachment styles, right? So like where does the shadow work? And this is too much to probably go into, but the shadow work moves into like the attachment style because you figure out what your traumas are and then that's how you know what I'm saying? Like I feel like avoidance but you tell us. I don't, you
Yeah,
know.
it's a great question. I totally see where you're going with it. And they're connected because the things that trigger us, like there's different perspectives, right? So I developed a framework called integrated attachment theory, and it's about
Yes.
the science of how we can become secure. So it's based on a few core principles, linking back to the subconscious mind again. Number one, you're not born with an attachment style; it gets conditioned into you, and so that's because of neuroplasticity, and thus we can leverage the principles of neuroplasticity to recondition any maladaptive attachment patterns that we created, or that were basically created in our
Yeah.
relationship with our caregivers.
But I have to tell you, I love that because a lot of people don't know that you're not born with that attachment style.
Yes,
And they also, a lot of my clients feel like they can't change.
I
And I'm like,
know,
no, you
which
can
is
get secure. We can get you to secure. And they're like, no, 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 no. I'm going to be this way forever. I'm like, wow, keep going, please.
And that, like, to your point, which is so powerful, that is where, in my opinion, there can be this really kind of like double-edged sword where
Yeah.
sometimes people will just identify with this label and almost overattach to the label itself. And then it creates more sabotage in the relationships. And it's like, well, did it even do anything good for you to learn this about yourself if you weren't going to do the work to change it? Then so it brings that really important question. So we created a framework, and it's actually about 5 key pillars to become secure. And what I've done is gone through the science of like what securely attached individuals do. And they have 5 key factors. And then we reverse and engineer and recondition those pieces into somebody who has
So
maladaptive
cool.
patterns to
Yeah.
get them in alignment with securely attached styles. So first thing is core wounds, which is super interesting. So a securely attached individual just has less core wounds and less intensity of when they are triggered by things because they have less emotional storage. So if you look at how a trigger really works, what happens is we get a lot of repetition and emotion. It's what conditions the subconscious mind of learning something about ourselves because of painful events. It can be small T trauma or big T trauma that's there frequently, right? So if somebody felt constantly like they were not good enough in childhood, or like they were going to be abandoned, or somebody was pulling away from them, or that they were trapped, then we learn this about ourselves. We store these ideas about ourselves. You see a lot less of that with somebody securely attached. So step one is actually to recondition our core wounds if we have them. And I can actually list off the different core wounds per attachment style because they're very succinct. So anxious attachment styles, their big core wounds tend to be, I will be abandoned, alone, excluded is a big one, disliked, rejected, not good enough, be seen as bad, be unseen or unheard, and unsafe, especially if somebody pulls away. Yeah, are those yours?
But I've worked really hard.
Yeah.
That was me anxious. I was like, you're just talking, you're speaking my language.
I love that though. But isn't that like, that's such a beautiful example for people listening that you've worked through that. And yeah. And that's like the power, I love that. I love to hear that. So, then we have our fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidant. So dismissive avoidance, big core wounds are, I am unsafe in a conflict. I am weak if I'm vulnerable. I'll be trapped in a situation and not be able to communicate my needs. Again, if you had childhood emotional neglect, you didn't get your needs met. And so then you assume that people won't meet your needs, and then you fear being trapped as a result. And if there was a little bit of enmeshment or engulfment in childhood, you'll see the same sort of manifestation of that. So I am weak, I am unsafe, I am trapped. I'm not good enough shows up in its own form.
Yep.
I am incapable of change can be a big wound for dismissive avoidance. They tend to be like, I can't change, or it's not possible. Yep. And then also a huge wound for them is I'm defective. They childhood emotional neglect does that. Although they're very stoic on the outside, internally, they're very sensitive to criticism. They'll shut down and really pull away because they take it all the way to heart. They take it like, oh, you said I didn't do the dishes?
That's my boyfriend.
I am, something's wrong with me at my core, not a behavior you want me to, pay attention to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He takes it so personally, but he's done the work too, which is good. But yeah,
I love that. I love that. Yeah, that's so good. And so you'll see these big core wounds come up, and fearing of being helpless and powerless. There's some other honorable mentions. Disrespected can be one, but those are the big ones for dismissive avoidance.
Okay.
Fearful avoidants tend to share in a lot of the anxious and avoidant side because typically they have both the anxious and avoidant side to their attachment style. So I'll be abandoned, I'll be alone. I'll be not good enough or unworthy. I'll be bad. I'll be trapped or helpless. Big ones for fearful avoidance. And I will be betrayed is a huge one. Fear of being betrayed, constantly hypervigilant, suspicious, these sorts of things. So first step is we have to recondition our wounds. And we can use that tool we used earlier, the auto suggestion tool for 21 days. And it is game changing to do that work. As somebody who had a ton of core wounds, as you know, having done a lot of this work too, like these things really transform the way we see ourselves, the way we see the world, the way we see other people and relationships. We get triggered less. We manage our emotions better. Lots of good things to do there.
Agree.
Second pillar is we need to learn our needs. Securely attached individuals, they know their needs in relationships and they're not afraid to communicate them. And so that's part of something that you'll see with all insecure attachment styles that they don't know how to do very well.
Right?
Exactly. And you'll usually see they don't know what their needs are or that they even have needs a lot of the time. So anxious attachment styles, a lot of their needs in relationships tend to revolve around feeling validated, reassured, encouraged, made to feel important, like they are a priority, like they are seen, heard, understood, valued in relationships. And they really need certainty. If you cancel plans, reschedule them or tell them why.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. So many clients of mine are anxious.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't know if it's do you think it's a gender thing, or do you see a lot of women that are typically and men that are typically avoidant? Do you see that or no?
Generally, you're looking at around 60-40, at least in North America. Okay. So 60% women anxious, 40% 40% men anxious. And then the reverse, 60% and 40% now. If we're just looking at the anxious and avoidance spread, right? Not including the fearful avoidant, the secure, and that kind of thing. The traditional numbers are about 50% of people are securely attached. And then it's usually 20-20 and somewhere between 5 and 10, like around that. So it's a great question. And I'm sure you see that skew, right? For sure.
Yes.
The needs for the dismissive avoidant, a lot of their needs in relationships, if you ask them, it's so funny because they'll be like, I don't have needs. And then as you actually ask them and suggest things and help them unpack, their needs tend to be quite similar. They need freedom, independence, and autonomy, obviously. Then they need, believe it or not, they need acknowledgement and appreciation about small things. Goes a really long way.
Huge.
And they really need empathy, support, understanding, and acceptance. Those are big ones from people in relationships. If they feel like those things are met, they tend to feel safe, and they need harmony in relationships as well. They don't tend to like too much conflict. Fearful avoidance, they need novelty, they need growth, they need depth of intimacy, they need trust. They need context for things, transparency. They need to be considered. They need congruency. All those things kind of bleed into trust. And they tend to want to feel like there's some sort of like fun and exploration in the relationship dynamic, progress on an ongoing basis. And then they still want to feel like they're a priority to their partners as well. So those are sort of the needs. And once we learn our needs, pillar number 3 becomes we need to learn to communicate these needs.
Oh, gosh almighty. Yes, please. Yeah.
Exactly. And actually receive them. And so, all of a sudden, when we do this practice of knowing our needs and communicating them repetitively, it gets conditioned into our subconscious. Just like when we start riding a bike for the first time, we have to think about it. We have to like steer the handles, pump the brake, look where we're going. And then you do it a few times and you practice, and the repetition and an emotion of that conditions neural pathways for you to be able to get on the bike and look at the trees and look at the flowers and talk on the phone or whatever you're doing, because it's now become a subconscious process. And so you don't have to think about it. It doesn't take that much work. And so that's what we try to do. We try to get the core wounds reconditioned so that there's an absence of them. And then we try to actually condition in the awareness of our needs and the ability to practice communicating the needs over time. And then the last 2 things, at a very high level, which I know we could go into in detail, but just high level, we need to condition better boundaries. All 3 insecure attachment styles struggle with boundaries. APs tend to have a total lack of them. Fearful avoidants tend to have a very polarized relationship to their boundaries. They're like, have no boundaries at all. And then they get sick and tired of that. They get really angry. They have too big of boundaries. And dismissive avoidants tend to have too big of boundaries, and they need to work on actually conditioning more vulnerability and healthy compromise.
Right.
And so that becomes a rewiring process through repetition across 21 days over time. And last but not least, we need to regulate our nervous system. So we need to do the somatic work, actually get out of the fight flight response that we'll see far too often in insecure attachment styles. And if we can really get a focus on becoming more present and being in our body, then we'll actually see those 5 pillars tend to change our behaviors at the end. We'll see a lot of these shifts and changes as a result. And then we're just mirroring or modeling back what a secure attachment style has. They have good boundaries, they know their needs, they communicate them, they have an absence of core wounds, much more so, and they have a more regulated nervous system.
Okay, I have a question before you go, because I can't keep you here forever, but I do have I know my listeners are saying, Jennifer, please ask this question. Yeah. What happens when you're anxious, let's say I'm anxious, and my boyfriend or my partner is avoidant, or I think, and he's not using his words, and all you want are words, and I have a lot of my clients that's their biggest issue. They are anxious. They need to work on getting to be secure. But how do they ask their partner to do the work if they won't do it?
Great question. So I'll give a little bit of a backstory here, or not a backstory, but a longer explanation. First thing I always recommend to people is set a deadline. Know your non-negotiables, know your standards, and set a deadline. So sit down. If your relationship's on the rocks, if you've been going through a really hard time, you have to set a timeline or deadline relative to your degree of investment. So for example, if you've been with somebody for 15 years, you may say, I'm going to put a year or even 2 years really into this. I'm really going to pour everything I can, learn all the tools, practice, reconditioning these things, and do the work. And I'm going to do everything I can in that 1 year period, let's say. At the end of it, because you're healing and you're secure, you're not going to want to put up with the unhealthy behaviors any longer from anybody, regardless of what their attachment style is. So you're putting yourself on a win-win trajectory to either know that you are worth more and feel good and be able to heal and walk away from something that's not healthy for you, or best case scenario, which happens way more than I think people realize, is you do the work, you heal, and then on top of that, that actually causes the other person to start leaning into what you're doing. You're leading by example, and now both of you are becoming more secure together, and the whole relationship changes. Now, how do we actually have that conversation is that next part of your question. And I often give people 3 or 4 major points when it comes to communication, because when I was working with clients for a while, I would see people all the time, and I would have people come in and they would sit down on their first session and they would say, Thais, my husband or my wife or whoever it is, my partner, I've tried everything and I've told them that I need them to change and do the work with me. I've told them and they're not doing it. They won't do it. And I would feel like, oh no, this is going to be a tough case, and then I would further dig into stuff with them and ask more questions. And then I would learn that they were communicating with all love and respect terribly. They were not communicating. And there are so many ways that communication easily go wrong. And immediately it causes somebody to not be heard, not be seen, because they're just, they're saying, I really need us to do the work in the relationship. But if there's these key points that we do wrong in communication, we're not going to see the needle move. So in this deadline or this timeline, I want to make sure that people know there's a few tips for how to communicate so that your partner's actually likely to hear you. Tip number 1, I call positive framing. This is the difference between saying, you don't care about me, you never spend enough time with me, versus saying, hey, I'm feeling disconnected this week. I would love for us to spend more time together. Let's do something fun on Sunday. How about we go here?
Which makes complete sense, right? Like that's of course what you want to say. But I think in the moment, people are like, I don't know, then that's where they get lost.
Exactly. And, the point I really want to stress to people listening is that it's such a bigger deal than we think, because what happens is we all have years of conditioning around conflict. And your first, part of conditioning around conflict is when you grew up with your parents. And what happened? You would get criticized. And the moment you're criticized, then you would get punished, sent to your room, get a spanking, you're yelled at, whatever it might be. So we have automatic conditioning ourselves, the vast majority of us, that the moment we feel criticized, we go into defense mode, we go into shutdown mode. So our even like Broca's area of our brain, our language centers are not like lighting up in the same way. We are more triggered. We go into more, less prefrontal cortex behavior. Like we're not in a capacity or space to hear our partners, to hear our loved ones when they're communicating to us like that. So it's like almost tragic, because we can want something so much and keep trying to communicate it, but it just falls on deaf ears unless we really get that positive framing piece right.
Yes.
second step here is we have to paint a picture for what it looks like. I can't tell you how many times I would see people. This is a hard lesson for me in the first year of working with clients back in the day. And people would come in and they'd be like, I need my husband to support me more. And they leave and they say, okay, we're going to be more supportive this week. They leave, they come back the next week. Before they even sat their butts on the couch, the person would be like, my husband didn't even support me. And you know what the husband would do? He would go, what do you mean? I took out the trash every day.
Right, exactly.
And she would be like, but I needed you to give me encouragement. That's what I meant. And so what happens, which is so interesting, is that support means different things to different people because we have different conditioning. So we have to paint a picture. We have to say, I need more support. And that looks like, and here, let me paint it out. You doing exactly this thing. I'm really showing very clearly what it is. So that's the second one, so that we don't have any stone left unturned. Third one is true embodied communication is not this. It's not, I told you once, and now if you care about me, you're going to remember the rest of your life.
That is right. No.
And I totally get it because I've been there. I remember being the person myself that was like, I told them 7 months ago about this and they forgot 7 months later. And so they must not care. But, we have to remember everybody has decades of their own conditioning. And so unless we, what I call in step 3, or see our needs through, and then what happens instead is we, say something once and then we're not vulnerable. And we have to teach people our conditioning, and we have to actually recondition their preconceived notions from their own history, their own background, so that they can come to see us and understand us. And we have to see our needs through enough that it becomes subconscious for somebody else.
Yep.
And it's not something they have to consciously think about and remember. It just becomes a pattern in the relationship dynamic, just like riding a bike eventually becomes a pattern for how we treat each other. And that's actually huge for making it out of the power struggle stage. And that's true communication. If we say we need help around the house, our spouse shows up, does some of that for 3 weeks, and then they drop off. We say, hey, I really appreciate that you were doing so much around the house recently. I noticed that we kind of backslid a little bit. Can we just, keep working on that together? Great. The person shows back up. So, those are really important parts. And the last piece that I just want to say for step 4 is we have to positively reinforce good behavior.
Right? I think it's easier said than done for a lot of us.
Yes. And I would see people, unfortunately, the tragedy of this is I would see people who are like, they're in session, they're coming for counseling or coaching, and they come in and they're like, okay, I need my husband to, and it can be wife, husband, either way, but just for, ease sake, I need my husband to help with the laundry. And husband helps with the laundry. They come back the next week and, okay, how did the laundry go this week? How did that and the husband said, well, my wife just criticized me as soon as I did it. So why am I bothering?
This is exactly what my husband used to say. My husband, I call him my husband. Back in the day, he's like, I do everything wrong anyway. So just do it yourself. Right?
Exactly.
And it's like, you criticize. He said to me, everything I do, I feel emasculated. I'm like, and that was such a huge aha moment for me because that's why we got divorced.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I'm sure
we talk about it all the time.
I'm sure not just you, but
I think I was pretty bad. But yeah, he's bad. Because both of us together, I always tell people he was a great dad. I was a great mom, but we were really shitty with each other.
Yeah,
So,
it's tough.
it's hard. You gotta hold yourself accountable.
So we want to positively reinforce that piece, as much as we can when we're trying to see change. And then, so we do these 4 things. We're practicing the core wound work. We're practicing our own boundaries, doing that inner work too, from what we talked about earlier. And then we have that timeline. And by the end of the timeline, you've done everything you can. You're communicating better. You know your needs and you're sharing them. You've reconditioned your core wounds. You've got good boundaries. You've regulated your nervous system so you can communicate better in conflicts and feel more at peace. And you're going to know loud and friggin' clear at the end of that timeline, did the other person show up? Did this make a difference? And if the other person didn't do the work with you and show up, you're more securely attached. So you're way better off from a personal perspective. And then you're going to look and go, for sure, this is not the right person for me. And I can walk away with no regrets, no guilt, and with complete certainty. And that's where we give people a win-win situation where it's like tons of healing and better future relationships, or tons of healing, better future relationships with the person you're already in the relationship with.
Exactly. I love that. And I just feel like I shouldn't say a lot, but some people stay thinking that this person's going to change, right? And they just don't. And then they're frustrated themselves and they're like, I can't believe I stayed. I can't believe, You got to both do the work. You gotta both do it.
Exactly. And that's why we set that timeline. So we never get stuck in that gray area for 10 years or 5 years or way too long. And then eventually we're like, wait, why did I stick around?
Right. Oh,
it wasn't working.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Okay. Like I've kept you so long, girl. You have to go. But Thais, thank you. Where can people find you? This has been like, honestly, I didn't even look at the clock and I'm like, crap, look at this. I feel bad. Where can people find you?
So I am at personaldevelopmentschool.com. If anybody wants to take an attachment style quiz, we're on there. And then I put daily content on YouTube.
Yeah, your YouTube is awesome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's Personal Development School Thais Gibson, which is THAIS.
Okay, and I'm going to put everything in the show notes so everybody can find you. Thank you, honey, for being here. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Will you come back?
Yes, I would love to.
Because I feel like we need to do more at the attachment styles.
I would love to.
Okay, I would come back.
I really enjoyed this.
Oh, good.
Thank
good, honey.
you.
Okay. Oh, I'm so glad to have you. Okay, everybody. So follow Thais. That's first. Secondly, do something good for yourself today. Learn how to lower your, what's it called? When you get triggered?
Cortisol and norepinephrine.
Yeah, all of that stuff. Learn how to breathe and speaking to myself here. Do something great for yourself. Get outside, do something fun, have a great day. And as always, when I say goodbye, I say peace, love, and so much truth. Y'all have a great day. Thanks, Thais. Bye, guys. Hey, thanks for listening to Doing Relationships Right. Don't forget, if you love my content and want to show your support, subscribe, rate, and review it on your favorite podcast platform. And grab my books, Midlife Priceless, A Dating Coach's Guide to Finally Doing Relationships Right, Woulda, Coulda, Shoulda, and One Happy Divorce at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target.com, or my website, jenniferhurvitz.com. Thanks for listening. See you next week. Peace, love, and so much truth.